Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Brussels Press Club and EU Reporter, may I welcome you. Thank you very much for coming today for our discussion on China-EU, an essential trade partnership, question mark. Many more people have registered to attend than are here at the moment, so I expect people are probably arriving a little late. There's also several competing events on at the moment, strangely enough all to do with China and Asia, so very hot topic. But we're fairly sure that we'll have quite an interesting and sparky debate today. And after the event there will be a sandwich, lunch and drinks, so we hope you'll stay and do some networking and meet people. Thank you very much for coming. If I may introduce our panel. Dr. Maurizio GERI is EU Marie Curie Fellow and former NATO analyst. He's a political scientist and he's, as his name suggests, he's from Italy. Ms. Linlin LIANG is Director of Communications and Research of the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU, a very, very important organisation, and thank you very much for coming today. Dick Roche is a former Irish foreign minister, government minister, and now a political scientist and analyst, and a fellow Irishman. Thank you very much, Dick, for coming. And our moderator is EU Reporter's political editor, Nick Powell, very experienced journalist, and I'm sure he will. He's going to moderate the debate and then throw it open to debate and questions at the end. And we hope you'll all feel free to make a contribution. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Nick now.
Thank you, Colin. I think when he says experience, he just means old, but there we are. Well, we've had the introductions from Colin, so I won't say much more before we get going. Clearly, a very timely debate. Lots in the news all the time now about the relationship between the EU and China, particularly as it affects the trading relationship, which has become, of course, absolutely huge over the years between the two. So each of the contributors will make some opening remarks, and I'll ask them to their sort of further thoughts in response to what the others have said, and then obviously I will come to hopefully anyone. I'll try and get as many people in as possible who want to ask questions. So without further ado, if Dick, you could get us underway, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Pick up the mic, please.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much. I actually thought I was last. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. As we say in Ireland, Gwina Úsal either agus éistal means that's ladies and gentlemen, whether young or old. I'm going to make the point up front. I have a kind of personal, this is a kind of a personal debate. This debate that's been going on about China and Europe for the last few years, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I recall very well when President Trump decided to effectively launch a trade war against China. I remember watching the discussions in 2018. And it struck me at the time that, and it has come back to me time and time again afterwards. In fact, I remember saying at the time, well, this is a double-edged sword. This is going to come back and haunt him. And I remember also saying and hoping at the time that the kind of bullhorn politics that he was engaging in would die down and that he would mature and get a bit of sense. The reality of it is, 6 years later, well, 5 years later, it still hasn't died down. And unfortunately, it has infected, I believe, the political debate and political consciousness across a whole lot of places other than the United States. Now, President Trump's policy was very American. It was very narrowly focused. He wanted to make America great again. He wanted to put America first. I don't blame any American president for any of those things. That's what they're elected to do. You're elected to office to look after the people who elect you to office. But you're not elected to office to determine how everybody else behaves. And President Trump's demonstration of a willingness to take a wider worldwide view, which I had always hoped to happen, has never happened. And the politics became more introverted, more isolated. And it always astonished me that this politicians across Europe, policymakers here in this city, who, when you meet them, would revile President Trump, were so willing to presume or to assume elements of his political approach. I could never quite work that out, because, as I say, my view was that President Trump, he was doing, as a patriotic American, what he thought was best for America. So the MAGA policy that the MAGA policy that he issued, it spun off into a whole series of other skirmishes. We had the issues on steel, we had the battles about solar panels, and of course we've had the battles about IT, about computer technology, and any other issue between those things. And the astonishing thing about the American debate was there was no element of introspection in it, and there still is no element of introspection in it. All of the debates that were conducted from American point of view. Again, I don't fault any American for doing that. That's what the American politicians were due to. But there seems to be, and it seems to inform those if that's the right word, what seems to inform those debates is a sense that we are the right people to make decisions, not just for this nation, but for every other nation. We saw this last year. If you recall, during the debate on Nord Stream 2, before it mysteriously blew up. There was a group of US senators who actually decided that they were going to introduce legislation in the US Senate to sanction the management of a German harbor that was doing legitimate business with some of the organizations that were building the pipeline. So, turning to the European perspective, from my perspective, of a citizen of a small country, an island off the coast of Europe, we made a decision as a people to join with the European Union in 1973. We decided to join what we regarded as a union of sovereign nations. Sovereignty is a big issue with small countries. And we decided at that time that we were pooling small amounts of our sovereignty into a union that would have a better presence on the world and could better represent us. So it strikes me and it causes me angst against that background that so many European politicians have swallowed the mythologies about China. There were, of course, exceptions. There were wonderful exceptions. I mean, I'm not sure if any of you, I have an almost photographic memory for photographs, for images, but I'm not sure if any of you remember this wonderful magic photograph of Angela Merkel at the G7 meeting in 2018. And she's standing at a table with her two hands on the sides of the table. And she is speaking straight at President Trump, who is sitting down with his mouth open, and his advisor is standing beside him, also with his mouth open. And around the group then are the other G7 leaders, all male, all looking on in shock and awe at this German lady who was actually making the point that we in Europe, we have something to say about how we determine our relationship with other countries. It was absolutely extraordinary. And to be fair, Helmut Schultz, when he came along after her, in a very famous article famous article, he actually continued her view. The person who made the point, of course, most dramatically, and continues to do so, about a Europe strategic autonomy, has been Macron. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything President Macron stands for, but in that he was very much in sync with the way I think about Europe and European sovereignty. So I want to just mention my personal experience. A number of years ago, I was invited by Huawei to advise the company. I knew very little about the company at the time. And over 5-6 years, I became hugely enthusiastic, not about my client, but about, in many ways, what it stood for. Here was a company that had built up an extraordinary technology, quite extraordinary, that had developed in its own way. And as a result of President Trump's decision that he was going to use this company in his war against China, I became, if anything, more committed to that company's cause, because I investigated very fully and very deeply and very personally the main arguments that were made against the company, the mythology about the company's ownership. The mythology, of course, was people don't recognize this now, or don't want to recognize this now. The mythology about ownership was created by a sidekick of Bannon, who was at the time a chief policy advisor in the White House, a gentleman who has recently, I believe, spent some time been found guilty of something in this. But that was the security, the myth of ownership. There was the myth of security. I remember talking personally to telecommunications operators across Europe, and they were laughing at this myth because they pointed out to me that for 10 years, Huawei had been a very big provider of technology across Europe, and they pointed out to me that there wasn't a single example of a security breach. And if there had been, the 14 or 15 intelligence agencies that operate in the United States, the people who gave us the benefit of the weapons of mass destruction, they'd have found it and they'd have made it publicly. That hadn't happened. Third point was the issue of intellectual property, and this is the point that annoyed me most, because I came to know people who had done research, the quite brilliant research that was being done. And if you look at the facts, here, I mean, I remember in 2019 I wrote a paper about this. Huawei had at that stage 85,000 active patents. 85,000 active patents. 50,000 of those patents had been granted outside China. The majority of those had been granted in Europe. Now, we don't actually hand out patents and pieces of paper in Europe for nothing. And the reality of it is that this company was being maligned, and Europeans were being fed BS, and they were believing it about technology and technology. And then, of course, there was the funding myth, the myth that Huawei was, we were talking about it earlier on, every country funds research. Every country funds what they think is going to be good for that country. We don't have a lot of resources in Ireland, but many years ago we made a very clever decision about our taxation. It's become a pain for people in Brussels for a long time, but that's an expression of our sovereignty. That's how we operate our advantage. So to wrap up, I think it is critically important, speaking as a European, I think it is critically important, first of all, that we determine our own future. Secondly, I absolutely agree with Macron's concept of strategic autonomy. That's not to say that we are not friendly with our friends in the United States. I'm Irish. For goodness sake, if you're Irish and you go to America, you become more American than the Americans themselves. You become a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. That's where I'm at. So there's anything of phobic against America. I actually think that what we did in the case of Huawei, we did huge damage to ourselves. We kicked out the technological leader. We imposed costs, dramatic costs on our operators. We damaged our consumers, and we stepped ourselves backwards. Now, interestingly, what's happening, of course, now is a rollback is underway. And the United States are very much at the forefront in that. There was headlines over the last couple of months have been about American repairing defenses. No question in those headlines as to who kicked the fences down in the first place. But in fact, what you've seen in the last 10 weeks, you've had Anthony Blinken over in China. You've had Janet Yellen in China. I don't know anybody saw the video footage from that. It's worth watching. You had Raimondo over there recently on developing trade links, including tourism, and of course Henry Kissinger. And literally, as he was approaching his 100th birthday, I went over there to talk about good old times. The headline was always that China wants to mend the fences. In fact, the reality of it is we all need to mend fences. Talk is what produces progress. Putting people behind a fence, behind a wall, decoupling, all of that is damaging. The best way forward, and I just end this with an anecdote. In 1978, I brought a group of students from University College Dublin to Russia. And I remember an evening in St. Petersburg when a professor of economics pointed to a bottle of, it was a Pepsi Cola on the table. And he said, that is the most subversive thing that has ever come into Russia. And the point he was making was that the opening of Russia to trade and to other influences was going to radically change Russia. And I'd forgotten about that until one of my later trips to Russia. I happened to be in Moscow the day before the siege on the White House. I left early that morning, and I could remember the Pepsi Cola bottle. If we actually want to get on this small planet and to make progress, surely to God it makes sense to talk to each other, to try and work out arrangements, not to be picking unnecessary rows and then 5 years later rolling them back. I look forward to debate, and I said myself, my Italian colleague, we're going to hit each other, but not with bottles, with words. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, that's a treat to come, but first, Linlin, please, your contribution. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to say that's very impressive. What they just mentioned, I would like to like something new because they mentioned what the sanctions on Huawei. Actually, Huawei has, I think, emerged stronger and better now. And if you know that, just I think next month it will launch a new 5G phone with the new chips all manufactured in China, which means that just to conclude that all those sanctions and bans just don't work. And I'm saying this also as a representative of the Chinese business in Europe. And I think the title of today's debate is very interesting. I will not put a question mark on it. Yes, in our opinion, China and the EU definitely is the partnership, the trade partnership is essential. It's key. It's key to all. And if you from the business point of view, the trade is always the foundation. And not say always, but in most cases, just the foundation of the bilateral trades. It just attaches so much importance to it. Just imagine like in 1975 when China and EEA, the former body of the EU, established the diplomatic ties. At that time, the bilateral trade between the two sides was only 2.4 billion US dollars. And can you imagine how much China EU trades now? So for one day alone, our average is 2.2 billion euros. And every minute when we're speaking, there are 1.6 billion US dollars of goods flowing between China and EU. This is amazing. I think this is amazing. I think both China and EU should be very proud of for the achievement the two sides have already made. And this is a little bit holistic view of the trade between the two sides. But there are a lot of room to improve. I would say we also identify a lot of places or the room for cooperation. For instance, the most significant thing would be the investment. In comparison with the massive trade flow between the two sides, our bilateral investment is still way too slow. Way too little. For instance, I think for the whole year, it's like the flow of the investment for the whole year, approximately 2 days of investment. So it's just I think there's just great potential to improve. And A little bit work for the chamber. Well, maybe not many of the audience know it. The chamber was established back in 2018 by three Chinese companies, namely the Bank of China Europe, the Coastal Shipping Europe, and Three Gorges Europe. And it was inaugurated by then Chinese Premier Li Keqiang on the sidelines of the China-EU summit, which took place in Brussels. I think that's basically the latest in-person China-EU summit in recent years. We are expecting another one, hopefully within this year in Beijing. And of course, this is all the concept of today's debate. And 2 days ago, China and the EU just concluded this high-level economic and trade talks, and the two sides agreed a lot of on, I think, consensus in 6 major areas: micro-policy exchanges, the stability of the supply chains, and the financial cooperation, the business environment, and the trade and economic times. And I think China agreed to import more from the EU, and to also agree to set up a lot of the new dialogues mechanisms, for instance, about the export controls. Well, the background is we know a lot about the chips restrictions, and then the warming mechanism on the critical raw materials, which is also the key issue, and we understand is a concern from the EU side. And as well as other, to our view, to the business point of view, it's quite candid and constructed to the both sides. And we do think that out of this information, I think it will contribute to also our conclusion of today. First of all, trade is of great importance to our bilateral ties. And secondly, we also, from the chamber point of view, we also identify the key areas for cooperation, the digital economy, the green economy, and the sustainable development. And well, I will not elaborate too much. I will end here. I think probably we can discuss more later.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm sure we recall there was a fairly open difference over the whole dispute over electric vehicles and batteries, which we may come on to as well. But there we are. If I may summarize slightly, you obviously definitely a vital relationship, an essential relationship, and one that needs to be deepened in your view. Maurizio.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to speak after such experienced people, and let me play, obviously, the devil advocate here. I am Italian, and as Colin said, so we are used to play the devil advocates to make it a little bit a livable debate. So, it is an essential partnership, this between EU and China. No, it's not an essential partnership. It is a risky and even dangerous partnership. So finally, European Union woke up from the long sleep. 20 years since the EU-China trade deal. 10 years since the Belt and Road Initiative. Recently, the new strategy of European Union is the de-risking. So this means that we don't want to be dependent in our strategic assets and in our transition at energy level and at economic level from a giant civilizational state who is rising economically but also militarily, not only in its area and region but in the world. Before the summer here, we had a meeting on this risk of the China desire of domination in the world, and there were several points of view. Here, there are some people represented in the audience that come from South Asia. I see someone from probably the Indian subcontinent. According to PwC, in 2050, China will be the first economic power with 55 trillions of GDP dollars. India will be the second with 45, US the third with 35. Europe will not have even 20 billion European Union. So a very small power. As such, European Union cannot depend from a dominant power. So finally, as I said, the boiling frog metaphor, because you probably heard about that, you are boiled and you don't realize that you are boiled until you are, because you are gradually warming up, is coming out of the pot. Europe is jumping out of the pot. The relationship that we had, the so-called honeymoon with China, is ending. Now, why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because I come from Italy. And Italy was the only G7 country, the only European Union country that signed the Belt and Road Initiative 5 years ago. It was a populist action by Conte, who was a very anti-European Mr. President, Prime Minister. This created a big unbalanced dependence of Italy from China. China doubled the exports to Italy in the last 5 years, from 30 billion to 60 billion. Italy increased the export to China for a couple of billions of euros. So Meloni, the first woman prime minister in Italy, is showing European Union the future, the path. Our priority is not the Eastern Asia power. Our priority is the southern line, is Africa. The priority of Europe is Africa. There are someone, I think, representing here from Africa. Recently, Italy made an agreement with Angola on the mines, on the mineral earth materials. You know, 98% of European Union earth materials, rare earth materials, is coming from China. This is absurd. This is nonsense, because the majority of earth materials is mined in Africa. I spoke the other day with a young fellow from South Sudan. He's doing a PhD here. He said, we are mining all the earth materials. The problem is China buy the ore, the stone, the ore mineral, and process them in China, because in Africa we don't have enough factories to process them. So what the European Union has to do is what Italy is showing them, is to support the technological revolution, not only in Europe, for strategic assets and for energy and for the new technology, but also in Africa. Africa is the region that Europe should support, because I come from political science, as Colin said. I'm doing a postdoc. I will start in January the postdoc. I'm in between jobs. In the past, I was working as an analyst for NATO. And I know, as a political scientist and a comparativist, that economic interdependence with states that are not democracies, it doesn't stop from conflict. And we know the direction where we are going. NATO already said last year, for the first time in its strategic concept, China is a strategic rival. Is a rival means is not an enemy, but is a rival. Is increasing its militarization in the areas, and Europe cannot find themselves dependent energetically from a country that is going to probably have some actions that can be repentant. Because as Russia, unfortunately, invaded our dear brothers in Ukraine, there could be something in 10 years or in 20 years, who knows, when China believe is going back to the center of the world, that some irrational action will come and some military action will come that will find Europe in the other side and depending on energy. So I'm very happy that finally von der Leyen said, we are de-risking, we have a new strategy. We are now to go to invest also in, investigate, in the subsidies that China is giving to these electric vehicles. Upstairs here, there is the automobile club, Italian automobile club, not Ferrari outside, but they are worried about this importation of electric vehicles from China, because it's reducing the possibility for Italian electric vehicles to produce. I'm not saying we have to go towards the IRA US system of protectionism. Globalization helped a lot in the last 20 years to grow economically. But we want growing countries and gigantic countries to be regional leaders. Regional leaders means that US will have to think about the Americas continent, Europe will have to think about the African continent, and China about the Southeast Asia continent, and India about its South Asia region. We don't want, and it's not possible to have a dominant power in the world. The unipolar moment of US that failed showed that there is imperial overstretching impossible to be maintained by any country in the world. So Xi Jinping, when he said in 2013 in front of our prime minister, who was the only prime minister from European Union in Beijing, when he launched the Belt and Road Initiative, he said, we have to flow as a flock of geese in the world. Yes, but the first goose cannot be China and cannot be neither US. Nobody has to be the dominant power. It has to be regional integration, and it has to be a very fair and equal relationship at trade level. We have an imbalance of 400 billions between Europe and China. Finally, we realize that, as I said, we are waking up, and I hope that Italy can show the path to European Union also with the new, as I said, the priority towards the South. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a comprehensive recasting of the world order in all of that. How much of that we can pick up today? Well, obviously what we will pick up on is how it affects EU-China relations. Dick, do you have any response to what Maurizio just said?
I'm Irish to the core, and I actually, Maurizio, I have an issue. Yeah, I'm a very serious. I have a very serious anti-colonialist view. I actually don't believe that Europe has any right to lead or to show the lead to Africa. I think what we should be, given our long history, is on our knees begging Africa's forgiveness. I really do not believe that the United States should, and sorry, I'm not disagreeing with your analysis, Maurizio, because unfortunately your analysis is correct. These ideas are in politicians' heads. I certainly do not believe, given the history of the United States of interference, that it has a right to abrogate to itself leadership in the Americas, or indeed anywhere else, let alone global leadership. I don't believe China has any right of domination and leadership in Asia. In fact, I actually, having looked over the years at Chinese history, which fascinates me, I don't know if anybody's read the book 1421. It's about the about how China withdrew into itself when it was undoubtedly one of the most extraordinary nations on the then planet Earth. So I don't believe that anybody has the right to believe in the domination of anyone else. I park that because I don't disagree with your analysis. I just don't think that there's the right there. I think that Europe has the responsibility to think for itself. And going back to the Irish referendum campaigns, which I led, one of the things we said to the Irish people is that the European project is about pooling small amounts of sovereignty to create a union which is stronger in the service of the citizens of all of that union. So I think that we should, so far as we have any power at all, we should use it to improve the life and livelihood of every European citizen, do our best to help to improve the life and livelihood of citizens outside our territories. But I actually don't think that we should see putting China behind a wall, cutting it off as a progressive move forward. Of course, there are issues that we would all have with systems of governance in different countries. It would be better, however, to resolve those differences through dialogue and through encouraging progress. So I actually have to say I appreciate Maurizio's analysis because I think there's a clarity to it, there's an honesty to it. I just do not agree with the concept of anybody leading me or my state or my union.
Thank you, Dick. Linlin, will you find that clarity and honesty similarly bracing?
Very interesting perspective, I think. Well, I would like to respond a little bit on the trade imbalance and the EV and the anti-subsidy investigation about the EVs, because it's also of great concern to the business sector. So in our opinion, the trade imbalance, or you call it the trade deficit, I mean, from the academic view, it's not a reliable indicator of any imbalance. It changes so quickly. For instance, in 2021, Germany has a trade deficit with China, and I think there are two more countries along with Germany had the trade deficit with the China surplus with China, sorry, and then around 20 countries more have the trade deficit with China. But in 2022, Ireland had the trade surplus with China. So it, if you view from the whole view of the whole thing, it's not possible for the country or for the EU to have the trade surplus with every trading partner. It's just not possible. And on the other hand, for China, when China export too much to Europe, it also brings a lot of risk, because we relied too much on the European market. And I can also give you the recent data of the export and import from January to July this year. And for instance, the EU's import from China declined around 13%. In the first 7 months of this year, and the export to China declined, I think, a little bit slightly. However, this already it's very threatening for our companies regarding the concerning the exporting sector. Secondly, about the EV anti subsidy investigation, I would like to draw all our audience attention that this investigation did not generated by any complaints. I mean, substantial complaints from the EU industry. You see, when you initiate the anti-subsidy investigation, there are 3 kinds of ways. First, that you receive a specific complaint from the EU industry, and those companies should represent 25% of the production of the whole capacity. And then in this 25%, there are over half of the companies, they are in favor of the complaint itself. So let's be very clear. First of all, the European Commission didn't receive such kind of complaint. And then this investigation was initiated by the Commission itself after 2018, when the rules for the trade defense instrument changed, allowing the Commission to have the more power to initiate this kind of investigation. So this is key point missing from all these debates. So let's remember, it's not from the industry itself. It started from the Commission. And that's why the chamber published its statement 2 hours after the President von der Leyen made this announcement. We strongly oppose that, because it in our opinion, it's just a pure protectionism, act of a protectionism. And secondly, when President von der Leyen said the subsidies distorted the European market with cheaper cars from China, and that also President mentioned to you before that no, the Chinese EV cars, they're not cheap. The price of the Chinese imported EV cars are basically double the price than the sold in China. And if you look in the market, our members, for instance, Neo Europe, they sell just luxurious cars in China with the price similar to Mercedes-Benz and BMW, and those luxury brands, you name it. Just too simple to respond to that.
Yeah, Maurizio, I mean, there's something there, isn't there, that, you know, after all, nobody was stopping Europe or indeed America investing in the battery technology that the Chinese are now so far ahead on. There was nobody stopping us investing in Africa when the Chinese were, as they have been for many years. I mean, is it just essentially a trade economic case that we need to become a bit smarter?
Yes, Dick, I agree with what you say in the sense that, and then I will answer also to my colleague and friend from China, and your point. What I'm saying about the African pivot is not related with the approaches of neocolonialism or such type of things. The Piano Mattei, we have a new plan in Italy, is from the name of the ENI director, former president in the past, is a peer-to-peer relationship. It is an infrastructural investment that Italy wants to do with Africa, with African countries. So it is something that we want to support the technological revolution, the infrastructure investment, but peer-to-peer. So means very equal relationship. And so this is, I agree completely, nobody has to dominate a region. What I meant about regional powers is that these countries exist, these powers exist, but they will be regionals. They will not be world powers. The great power competition in reality will become a regional power competition, according to me. Now, on the, for example, okay, so passing it to the colleague from China. Italy, why is going out of Belt and Road Initiative and wants to go back to the global partnership agreement of Bao and Berlusconi 20 years ago? Because it was an agreement in which we had a more peer-to-peer relationship, again, more equal relationship. And Belt and Road Initiative, which is now competed by the IMEC, the India, Middle East, European corridor that has been launched recently, is something that is scared us because we didn't want the assets of strategic assets like ports, etc., being built by a strategic rival. And also Huawei and the G5, all this story. I am not an economist, I'm not an expert on details as the former minister, but it's obviously something that is dangerous. You cannot give your strategic assets in the hands of a country, for example, that recently made a spy law, right? A few days ago, a few weeks ago. There is a new law in China in which who does investigation on the, for example, the due diligence. You know, when you do a contract as a business, you have to do an investigation on due diligence if this company is respecting some rules, some law, labor rights, etc., etc. If you do this kind of investigation now in China, you are considered espionage. You are doing espionage and spy. This is a dangerous thing. It's a political issue that is affecting trade. And there is no such thing in the US, for example. I mean, this is something that what I was referring earlier. When you do interdependence with similar polities is one thing. When you do interdependence within democracies and dictatorships is another thing, or autocracies. So that's why India, for example, is a democracy. And that's why I think is something that IMEC is more strategic from European Union perspective at geopolitical level. And then regarding the strategic autonomy, and we need to reduce the risk of being dependent on all these fuel cells, batteries, lithium batteries, etc., etc. And we can do it if we invest in technology, in particular in dual-use technology. Military, I will study in the next 3 years the dual-use technology, the artificial intelligence, quantum, etc., etc. The dual-use military civilian technologies can help us to be independent. And this is the path I think that we should take.
Just a little, say to Maurizio, going back to the point of peer-to-peer, I accept that that's, and I actually believe that Italy is in a very good position to take that particular view, because Italy doesn't have quite the history of many other European nations. So I fully accept that. But to come to your last point there about intelligence laws, I actually was going to mention this earlier in my own contribution. If anybody really wants to take an analysis of intelligence laws, you need to look very closely at US intelligence laws. And remember that the intelligence legislation that was acted in China, it has one fundamental difference, a very fundamental difference from its counterpart legislation in the United States. US legislation claims extraterritoriality. China makes no such claim. In fact, no other country in the world makes such claim. Indeed, the leader of the Supreme Court in the United States, he actually makes the point that, in his view, that claim has no legitimacy. But that's a debate that's going on in the U.S. I have a view. I sometimes get annoyed when this particular issue comes up because I object. I don't want anybody looking. I don't have any secrecy. If I lose my laptop, it's not going to be an embarrassment like other laptops that have become lost over the years. But I believe privacy is privacy, and I believe everybody should respect that. And within the individual nations, people make laws which are relevant to their particular circumstances. But I think we should avoid simply putting a label on the laws which are made by one country and saying these are abhorrent, while we actually turn a blind eye, as we do, to the similar laws in our greatest friend. I mean, I think it's a horrific mistake that America has made. I really do, so that's a reality. I could talk at length about 5G, and I think that the fact that there's new phones coming through, I actually think that the decisions that were made in that area are coming back to haunt us and are counter-effective. But I just want to make the point, because my criticism might have been a little sharp. I accept absolutely Maurizio's point about peer-to-peer review. And I think, by the way, I'd have some issues with it, but at least it's much better than the sort of semi-colonialist view, which I regard as operating, from the United States.
Okay, well, things are in danger of getting too cordial here. Let's see what people would like to contribute. Gentleman there first, please.
Hi, Chen Weihua, China Daily. I just have a quick few points of observation, then I have a question. So I just, I come back from just a trip from Italy, so I have great respect for, but I do have an issue with Mr. GERI. I mean, you talked about dependency. Actually, China depends on EU so much, Germany, France, Italy too. So we are interdependent. I mean, this is part of the globalization. So you are dependent on the US. So what do you want to do this? Because Trump may very well come back after 2034. So that's one thing. I think it's a great thing we are interdependent. So globalization has shown, Linlin said very well, the numbers. And EU had a huge surplus in trade with China in the 1990s, and we don't have issue with that. And you didn't talk about that in the 1990s. And the second thing, you seem to argue the Biden's democracy versus autocracy. But are we going to be better off? If we go back to the Cold War, I traveled in Europe. I remember I cannot go to the East Bloc of, there's a dividing line. Germany was two countries. So are we going back, or even trigger Third World War, like two previous World War, what happened here in Europe? And the third, I want to say that China and EU enjoyed a great progress in relationship, not because we are the same. We're different from the day one, and we cooperate, and that's a better thing. I mean, EU 27 are so different. You didn't say we should kick out Hungary because we disagree with, or kick with Georgia Meloni because a lot of in Europe don't like her. Anyway, but that's the beauty of the world. We're different. And I also have issue with your Monroe Doctrine, like Africa is for Europe, Asia for China. I don't think so. We are in the world. I mean, if Europe helped Africa really from day one, Africa will be a prosperous continent by day one now. And if US helped Latin America, Haiti would not be a failed state. I've been to Haiti. I've been to Cuba 3 times and sanctioned by US for 60 years. Anyway, but my question really, I could go on forever. But do you think we want to go back to the old days? I mean, the Cold War, to trigger a new Cold War? I mean, is that what you prefer? Because it seems to, because they are not democracy. Would you prefer China to have the same economic size with India, which India had the same economic size in the 1990s, but now we are 5 times bigger. So it's a success story for China. Do you think it's better for China to fail? Thank you.
Okay, I will of course bring everyone in, but that was rather directed at you, Maurizio. So go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, thank you for the intervention. And yeah, obviously the Cold War nobody wants. The point I'm making here is this. The 1990s were different, okay? Since China entered the World Trade Organization, it had a lot of advantages and 10% GDP growth per year. But then in 2013, there was the idea of this regime, not China, because there are 1.5 billion people, in Chinese and Italians, whoever, are different from the regimes that they sometimes represent them, sometimes they don't represent completely them. This current Communist Party of China said in 2013, we want, said it in words and also in actions, we want to be the leaders of the international system. Not only that, but Xi Jinping, 10 years after 2013, signed with Putin an agreement, very important, just few days before the invasion of Ukraine, saying we are alternative to the liberal international system that has been created after World War II. We are the real democracies. This is in the text. Democracy is a relative word. Everyone has their own system. And we want to create a new system with BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And they say it in words, and they say it in fact, and they do it in facts. Not only economically. I said I come from NATO, and we had a meeting here on the militarization of South China Sea. Now, this, in the time of fascism in Italy, we had the late industrialization, we had the gigantic economic growth, and when a country becomes an economic power, invest in technology, military technology. And the investment of China in military expenditure is increasingly exponential. This, it doesn't seem to me a positive approach, which is why the European Union decided to do the de-risking. Maybe not yet the decoupling, even if according to me the decoupling is nothing out of the world, because last year we had an unprecedented decoupling from Russia. 60% less of non-energy imports from Russia. 2022, 2023, even more. We are completely decoupling economically from Russia, and then nobody's going to, completely change the history of the world. So there are trends and counter trends. We had the trend of globalization. Now we are realizing that it had good advantages, but also disadvantages, like empower imperialistic, civilizational autocracies that can take a megalomaniac approach to want to dominate also militarily and maybe in the future politically the world. So, which is why European Union decided to do this. Now, at technical levels, I'm not very expert, but we have a lot of processes that we can do. For example, friend-shoring and near-shoring. What does it mean? The supply chain and the value chain, not only the materials, but the manufacturing, so the value chain, can be redistributed near your geopolitical area and with the friends, the geopolitical friends, because you will not have issues when you do, for example, the investigation for the contract before the due diligence. So these are processes that are proposed by the European Union, by Italy. The near and the friend shoring is something that is happening. India is also doing something similar with the regional countries. So I'm not saying that we are creating a new Cold War. I'm saying it's a natural thing. The regional blocks will come, regional integration will happen. Also, African Union has a lot of difficulties, but they also have the trade interdependence now. They have the free trade agreement. So I think this is the point I was going to, but obviously nobody wants to go back to the Cold War.
Linlin.
I think I catch the very interesting phrases or two catchphrases of nearshoring and friendshoring, which Gary just mentioned. What nearshoring, I think it's another saying of localization. And when business expand overseas, localization is it's by nature. It's basically it's a way to reduce the costs and to promote yourself, to localize your production. This is kind of market-driven development. However, the friendshoring is more politicized. I think I don't think it will, from the business point of view, it will reduce the cost if you're friendshoring to the place where the labor cost is just very high, the compliance cost is very high. It doesn't make sense to the business sector. But I want to say to differentiate the two phrases. And concerning the GERI also asked a very interesting question about who would let the foreign companies to control those strategic assets, right? What we heard a lot from the EU's perspective, particularly from the NATO's perspective. I have a clear answer to this intriguing question. China allows the European countries to process a lot of the, let's say, strategic assets. For instance, the 20% or 30%. I don't know the specific figures, but the 5G core networks in China constructed, they were from the European companies. And while the EU, its member states are excluding the Chinese telecom providers like Huawei and ZTE. And regarding the harbors, where a lot of the documents are arguing about the harbors, the China's first foreign harbor law is harbor law back in, I think, soon after China joined the WTO, it had a new law allowing the foreign companies to process the ownership of the terminals. Of course, you have to view it in practically, but I'm saying by law, China does allow the foreign companies to process those strategic assets. So, and regarding the situation in Europe, so we now think there's a lack of reciprocity here.
Thank you. Dick?
Just very briefly, because I've spoken too long, but I personally believe that one of the good things that we should do, one of the things that we need to do in this debate, is trying to introduce the idea of perspective. There is, I think, amongst the North American Indians, the expression that you have to walk a mile in another man's shoes to understand how people see things. And I think that's one of the things that's missing from this debate. I have this view that we continuously look on the far side of the world or a different place as the other. And the point I make about that is we just mentioned, you mentioned yourself, NATO's interest in the South China Sea. Well, I have to say, you know, the answer is in the title. It's the South China Sea. And NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And, you know, there is this old expression that we'd be all better off if we looked after our own knitting. And if NATO is worried about seas, let's look at our own part of the planet. Let's not decide. I mean, I remember when Stoltenberg said this, my eyes just went to heaven, and I said to myself, well, thank God I'm not a member of NATO. I mean, the reality of it is there will be regional interests. We have our interests. The United States has its interests. We shouldn't always try to demonize the other. We should try and see things maybe, just maybe, once in a while from other people's points of view.
Okay, gentleman there.
My name is Frank Schwalbe-Hoth. I'm one of the founders of the German Greens, and I was the first Green member of the European Parliament here. When I studied as well theology. And therefore God told me the following: when he created other countries, he placed always very strange, sometimes stupid, and sometimes dangerous people there who have in general the same thinking of yourself. And this is the reason for it, we all know it, for a lot of conflicts. Therefore, as the European Union attitude towards China is not la grande amour, I focused some of my activities on China. I'm, for example, the vice president of the World Green Design Organization, a Chinese organization on circular economy. I'm doing interviews for the Chinese edition of Financial Times. I have regularly interns from China, and I'm advising a German company who has every day 3 trains from China to Europe and from Europe to China, trains 700 meters long with containers on it. Therefore, I'm very much interested and I'm very close to Chinese and Chinese culture, Chinese people and Chinese politics. But I discovered something why we are sometimes not in deep love, because for us here in Western Europe, in the US, the ideal is to have something where you have a government and every election the opposition could take over, and we see this as an achievement, and I think it's an achievement. But if you look on Chinese history, they were incredibly lucky and satisfied when there was one strong leader. If there were distorting interests within China, it was always a period of which you wouldn't like to have. I think we have to acknowledge this, that for Chinese, the model of having a government, the next election, an opposition would take over, means a break with their perception of their history. But because, now my real point is the following. I discovered who's governing the world. It is male and money, not women. Therefore, I'm one of the founders of the European Women's Leadership Award, an award 8 women every year who have achieved something, followed their heart and not the will of the family, of the society, and who had to overcome obstacles. For next year, we have now a Chinese candidate, incredible. She declined to be nominated. Why? Because some years ago among the laureates was a woman who was the president of the Tibetan Association in Belgium. But has nothing to do with her. It is an award which has given some years ago to a woman who considers herself as Tibetan. It reminds me a little bit of an experience with Iranian diplomats who left the table when I ordered a beer in a restaurant. I drank the beer, I never forced someone. And therefore, sometimes China is making it quite difficult to be in an intensive, cheerful relationship if such an attitude is there, if someone from this part of China, which is for some people, where some people are not so happy with this, received an award, that you would refuse to receive an award from the same structure. For me, this is, I don't want to name it, but it's quite narrow-minded. Thank you.
Okay, Linlin, would you like to start us? Fun? No, well, yeah, let's respond to that and then we'll take some more questions. Do you want to answer that, Linlin?
Well, I think
Was it a question?
Why is China so difficult?
well, I am.
The Nobel Prize was given to even opposition leaders from China, but I don't think China should refuse a Nobel Prize for someone else years later.
I can't speak for others, so it could be an individual decision, I think.
I hope so.
Could I just make a point on that? Because, Franz, I thought your beginning was really great. I wasn't so hot about your conclusions. But the point that you made at the beginning, I thought was really interesting. I mean, we're all determined by history. Our thinking is determined by history. I mean, I'm absolutely to my core a Republican. I'm absolutely to my core a person who detests colonialism. That's because I am what I am. I was born in a country which suffered because of colonialism. I was born in a country which for 750 years suffered. I was born in a country where we had our own culture, the Brehon laws, the most progressive laws in ancient times, which not only recognized that there was equality between men and women, but actually gave women a better call on key issues than men. I mean, so I think we're all victims of our history, and we all look at things from our history. And I think you made the point extremely well. China and its history, to the degree that I understand it, and my understanding is very flawed, but to the degree that I understand it is the very point that you make. They have seen over the millennia the value in this huge space of one, the value of moving ahead together. And you know, you think about it, their thinking in that brought extraordinary things, the ideas of the control yuan, the ideas of the form of education, bureaucracy based on merit and meritocracy. These were a lot of things. So of course people's views are determined, and the politicians' thinking is determined, and the policies are determined. My view is this, that none of us have ever, it's an imperfect world, whether you're a Democrat from the West, whether you're a royalist who believes in the right of kings and the extraordinary connection between kings and God, God help God, you know, we are victims of our history, and wouldn't it be much more, isn't it much better to be open to other influences rather than to be drawing lines on maps and saying, this is my area of influence and I'm not going to listen to you. And that's my biggest fear about what is happening. And that's why I hate the idea of decoupling. It's, you know, you and I, Frank, we go back a fair while. And we were both children of the 60s. And you remember in the 60s, during the Vietnam War, the shout was, jaw, jaw is better than war, war. And whether, no matter what way you look at it, it is better to talk than to actually alienate the other. That's my key point. I'm not saying China is perfect. I certainly know that Europe isn't perfect. But rather than standing on our high horses and proclaiming our perfection, shouldn't we actually try to understand each other? And actually, in a small planet, try and put all our energy, our ingenuity, our enthusiasm, this human race, it's such energy. Why can't we put that to making it a better place for us all? And the only way we'll achieve that is by talking.
Thank you, Dick. Anything else, Maurizio?
No, just, I agree with the points of Dick. You know, cohabitation is not dependency. So nobody here is talking about, creating conflict. Here we are talking about a dependency of European Union in its energy transition from one country. That is, by the way, the giant of the world, and by the way, is a system that is very different from us. So cohabitation and collaboration, cooperation in many topics. Here we have a representative of the Green Party. He said the CO28, the COP28, the agreements in Paris is something in which we want China to have a bigger role. Why? First of all, because China is the biggest producer of CO2, double of US, which is the second, and 3 times, I don't remember, of the India, which is, I think, the third. And this means that we have to improve the relationship at the global level for global risks, problems, for example, with artificial intelligence. Now we have to collaborate with China on AI. We don't want someone dominate like AI, one country alone. So it has to be an international, for example, agreement. Climate change, but energy transitions, depending a new animal, a new political animal like European Union, depending on its most important process in the last in this century, which is the energy transition, depending completely 99% from one country like China, is absurd. It was stupid. Finally, we woke up. We are changing this approach, and as I said, Italy also is showing probably the path, saying we have to do collaboration in a peer way with other countries, other continents, and also with China, but in a proper, equal way.
Thank you. Okay, here, and then we'll go back to the back. I think. Oh, there's more hands going up now. Okay, but anyway, hold on.
Hello, my name's Sandra Kaduri from Keeping Channels Open. It's a dialogue network. I just wanted to ask about confidence building measures and in the political and security arena that might read across to trade. You know, if China stopped supporting Russia's war economically, This would win massive favor, obviously, in Europe and the US. And if they stop disinformation and propaganda against the West and international organizations, recommit to common international principles, I think this would go a long way, because we do risk becoming two rival blocks now with BRICS and everything. So what are the common international principles we could all commit back to? Because, you know, I just wanted to know what Miss Liang thought about condemning the Russian war.
Well, I don't think there are any support, any evidence of China's support. I mean, it's not sending weapons. And when you mention economically supporting Russia, I would love to know more, because at the same time, China also maintains trade with Ukraine. And then they're also doing a lot in the humanitarian channels and so on. This is the knowledge which I have. And well, from the business point of view, I think business sector is by nature free traders, and then the peace is peace and stability is the facilitator of the trade. And trade actually globalization and trade itself force of a peacemaking, I would say. Well, so if you ask, no, I think basically this is our stand. I think China also provides its stance and also offer its own methods for how to end this war earlier, and how to make constructive efforts into anything into it. Thank you.
The disinformation, propaganda side, there's a lot of accusations from the EU that there's a lot of disinformation coming from China.
The one very thing there is. Yeah, I'm from a business sector, but I would say that what I observe is that you sometimes just regard everything doesn't agree with its own narrative as disinformation, and I think probably you have to listen to both sides of the one coin.
Dick?
Sorry, Sandra, I mean, I agree with the objectives of your organization, because basically the whole idea is that people should talk. Just the disinformation issue, it is the easiest charge to allege. Remember in the 2016 election campaign in the United States, which I watched very, very carefully, I was one of those people who actually believed that there was a huge disinformation campaign. I believe the Russians had played a very negative role in that. When you actually look at the facts afterwards, you look backwards, right? You actually find out that there was some purchase of advertising space on TikTok, or not TikTok, sorry, on what is now called X. What was its former name? But the reality of it is, there wasn't a disinformation campaign. The disinformation campaign was actually spread from the United States. You know the case yourself. During the course of the election, at a critical day in the election, 50 US intelligence experts signed a letter which they knew was a lie. They're liars. And unfortunately, we all fall into this. As I say, I confess. Sorry, both sides with regard to that. I think it's an important point, because the reality of it is there's a lot of bad players out there, but they're not all on one side of the wall. The reality of it is that we in the West, and in particular the country that likes to regard itself as the leading democracy on the planet, which it's not, is guilty of disinformation too. You're correct. It would be wonderful if we had a world where there was truth and no disinformation. But I think, I just make the point, I actually think the thing is a little overplayed.
Okay, we're kind of getting to the point in the proceedings. We need to keep the answers fairly brief, but Maurizio, just want to come back on that? Okay. All right, then. I will, we started 10 minutes late, so I feel entitled to keep you from the canapes a little bit longer. The white wine can warm up a bit more. At the back there, Anna? Yeah.
First of all, I'm Anna Fandensky from Europe Diplomatic. First of all, I would like to thank all of you for your meaningful interventions. And I have a question to Maurizio, because you repeated more times of this de-risking. But how realistic is this illusion? Because every country within geopolitics has its own capacities, resources, etc. Is it our realistic political concept? For example, you mentioned Russia, but now Europe is buying Russian oil from India, and it makes India richer. So it's a big illusion, I think, that we can be independent totally. And my question is about risks, because you said de-risking, but my question to you is, what are the other risks? Because, for example, humanity has to unite resources to fight climate change, and China is, and thankfully is, an absolute leader. It produces 80% of solar panels. So within your concept of regional powers, how can we as humanity proceed? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the idea here is this. The strategic autonomy means that you need to diversify. Diversification plus internal production. So we are passing through a technological revolution. As I said, I will research on this in the next 3 years. Will this technological revolution help only one country to dominate the rest of the world, or help all the countries? So diversification means that you cannot depend 98% from one country. There is India is growing technologically, there is US, there is Africa, and there is China. Okay, European Union should diversify. Finally, they understood that, because the problem, I defend democracies. The problem with the decision makers that need to be re-elected, they don't have long-term visions. So they do the interest that is the short-term business interest, economic interest, without thinking to the geopolitical consequences in the long term. Now, finally, because of the evidence of the invasion of a free independent country like Ukraine, we realize that depending on an autocracy that tend to be imperialistic maybe is not the best idea. So even if you want to be re-elected in the next year, please think about your future generations. This means that you have to diversify and include China as all the others, regional powers or global powers. And obviously, when it comes to strategic autonomy, you have also to invest inside your countries. We have mining in the northern sea. We are discovering new mines of this lithium, of these earth materials. Okay, but then you have to process them. And then, as I said, Africa also needs the support for the industrialization to process their own resources. Can we do that? Yes. I mean, China it doesn't seem to me that is helping a continent, making it in debt with one country alone. Diversify. Also, Africa is trying to diversify. So the idea is strategic autonomy can be done, is possible, and is also urgent.
Okay, Leo's forgive me. Let's take another question. Gentleman there.
Hello. Thank you, everybody. I'm John with China Media Group. My question is for Dr. GERI. You talked about Africa. You said Europe. It's time for Europe to support Africa. I happened to work in Africa for 3 years in Nairobi, Kenya. To me, Africa has been ignored by Europe for years, basically absent from public discourse for years. This changed when Europe suddenly realized the so-called predominance or dominance of Chinese presence in Africa. My question is, if Europe really wants to do something for the betterment of the African people, why not seriously consider the prospect of working together with China in Africa? Thank you.
Okay, well, it was just directed at Maurizio, so.
Yeah, very brief answer. I mean, yes, as I said, Piano Mattei will be a proposal in the next year when we have the presidency of the G7 by Italy. And there is also space for collaboration, obviously, with the foreign countries that are investing in Africa. The point is this, it's not only because China wants to dominate also Africa that the European Union realized about Africa. The point is we are realizing that Africa is becoming 4.5 billion people by the end of the century. This means 1 out of 2 sapiens on the planet Earth will be African. So either you deal with this world change in a good way, or you are overwhelmed by the situation, climate change, political transitions that bring conflicts, and so the mass migrations that we are already having in Italy. But yes, I agree that there are possibilities to cooperate together, China, US, India, all the countries that can support the industrialization or the technological revolution of a very youth continent.
Okay, Linlin, Dick, any further thoughts on Africa?
Well, I think that the idea that, first and foremost, it's a really good question and it's a very long question, but to answer it very briefly, it's a bit of a pity that Europe took so long to realize that it has a moral responsibility to Africa and to become more positively engaged. And I'm not sure that being engaged just for our own best interests is necessarily the best way to get engaged. But going back to Maurizio's point, Maurizio's right. In fact, rather than again clamber into this two worlds, wouldn't it be a great idea, really good idea? And if Italy cannot get this through the G7, that the G7 nations, that China and Europe could cooperate to help undo the damage that has been done for generations to the people of Africa, and to meet our responsibilities to Africa, be a really good thing, provided we don't do it just with a view to poking the other guy in the eye. But let's work on the basis that Italy is actually in a good position because of the history. Italy is in a good position to make this, and hopefully people for positive rather than for strategic reasons will sign up to the idea.
Just from the business point of view, Africa has been a place for very good cooperation for Chinese and European companies regarding the third market cooperation. So I hope that the G7 in the next term will promote more of this kind of business cooperation. Thank you.
Okay, last question.
This is a question for Maurizio, my friend. So do you think actually, as you said, actually, Africa as alternative, so focus on Africa, do you think as European, they are still big power or big player in Africa? Do you think that?
Do you think what? Okay,
Big player or big player or big power actually in Africa? It's like Russia,
okay.
has like
United
States.
Directed at Maurizio. I'll take the one from the gentleman here as well before I take answers. Thanks.
Hello, Nagayo Taniguchi from Japan. I'm a journalist. In this town, every day I hear Indo-Pacific Association, Indo-Pacific Forum, Indo-Pacific Club, or whatever you name it. This morning it's running actually in other place, talking about the subject. What, Dr. Maurizio, you mentioned China is defined last year by NATO strategic rivals, not enemy. How is it like to live as a strategic rivals vis-a-vis this Indo-Pacific, whatever you know, the concept which is vague to me? The same question to Professor Linlin and to Honorable ROCHE. Your country, which is a member of the EU but not NATO, how is it like to live in this changing world and keep this traditional policy of neutrality vis-a-vis this Indo-Pacific?
Okay, right, there'll be a final pass. I'll go Dick, Maurizio, and then Linlin for the final word.
On the issue of neutrality, just a little bit, a tiny bit of history. The Irish people were absolutely horrified by the First World War. They were horrified by it. We're not a people that are shy of fighting. We fight when we believe in issues. But the slaughter of people from both communities in Ireland, I think, built up a repugnance to war. We don't see the need. There was a need for NATO. We don't see the need for Europe to become excessively involved in other people's issues or to be part of a fight that's created. I personally have an issue with the concept of NATO having some sort of strategic involvement in Indo-Pacific affairs. If I was from Japan, I would be rolling my eyes when I listened to the Secretary General of NATO making such commentary. So how do we live with it? It's becoming increasingly difficult, I have to say, because the amount of subtle and not so terribly subtle pressure being put on Ireland to actually reverse its position on NATO is a very real and serious issue. People in this city need to wake up. They need to wake up. We're a democracy in Ireland. We have a constitution. Every time we actually have a treaty change in Europe, we have to have a referendum. I had responsibility for 3 referenda, the second referendum on Nice, the first on Lisbon, and the second on Lisbon. And I know this, that the day joining NATO becomes a requirement of an EU member is the day the Irish people will vote against another EU treaty and cause mayhem. We should wake up. We should learn the lessons of the past mistakes. I feel terribly sorry that Finland and Sweden, because of the threat and danger that is posed by the outrageous war that has been waged in Ukraine, has tilted them towards NATO. I think that Europe would be far better served if that hadn't happened. But it's becoming difficult for a country like Ireland, like Austria, to retain neutrality in these issues.
Yeah, very quick because there is the lunch soon. But to answer my friend here, yeah, to avoid, I mean, for me, foreign meddling of great powers in Africa or in every region of the world, is the regional integration is the most important thing. And Africa is doing well, I think, with the free trade agreement with African Union. Obviously, as I said, there will be a lot of processes in Africa because of political transition after the colonial times and the dictatorships. And political transition, unfortunately, many times go towards military dictatorship because of the military coups. But as I said, to avoid this intervention, Russia or other military interventions, and also economic, like as I said earlier about you were not here about the art material in Africa, the regional integration of African Union with the free trade agreement, it's a very good tool. The other thing about Indo-Pacific, a very important point. Now you are from Japan. Okay, it's not a question of NATO. It's a question of alliance of democracies. So we have Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. They say, okay, we want to make an alliance of democracies because we feel threatened. We don't want to escalate the conflict with someone that is threatening us. So we have to ally, because alliance protect you. It's not only NATO alliance. There is also an alliance in this in the Pacific. In the Pacific that is growing, is making importance. Now, again, I support the regional integrations. For example, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, 600 million people, very diverse country, very diverse polities, but they can check between India and China the risk of the real conflict in Asia, because the real conflict in Asia, the risk is India and China, because they will be, as I said earlier, according to PwC, the first 2 great powers in the world economically because of their demographic dividend, etc., etc., etc. ASEAN can balance, contain the risk of demilitarization of this Indo-Pacific area that risk to become the most militarized area, much more than North Atlantic area that we have 70 years of cooperation in NATO. Because of this, as I said at the beginning, investment in military expenditure by China that wants to have this lead also a strategic and security level. This is the fear that the West has, and the democracy in the Pacific, they are coalescing to say, okay, we want to contain this because we don't want exactly to go to the times of Soviet Union or the Cold War.
Okay.
Very short answer. I think the business sector is very different from the NATO and military perspective. So as a free trader, we would definitely come back to the title of today's debate. China and EU are essential, both essential, the trade partnership. We are, China and Europe are partners, not systemic rival. Thank you.
Okay, well, it just remains me to thank the panel for their thought-provoking contributions, and to you for your thought-provoking questions. We will have another EU Reporter panel roundtable in the coming weeks, so I hope to see you then. But thank you all very much for coming along today.